Thank you very much. So, Bakhair, a very good morning to all of you. What an impressive congregation. Your Excellency, President Ashraf Ghani, First Lady Rula Ghani, First Vice President Saleh and Second Vice President Danish, distinguished ministers, National Security Advisor, Honorable Justice, members of the Parliament, SRSG, colleagues of the Diplomatic Corps, representatives of civil society, private sector, the academia, and the media, ladies and gentlemen, and whoever is following us online. I'm honored to welcome you today on the occasion of the 6th Annual European Union Anti-Corruption Conference. We deliberately integrated this year this EU brand event into one of the last of 5 Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework 2 workshops, namely the one on effective governance and anti-corruption. Allow me to first thank His Excellency President Ghani, who has kindly offered to host the conference again this year at the Palace and agreed to deliver the keynote. Today's conference takes place at a crucial moment 2 weeks ahead of the Afghanistan 2020 conference, where donors will pledge long-term support and in that context reflect on the government's anti-corruption efforts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, according to the Asia Foundation's The Survey of Afghan People 2019, over 80% of those surveyed consider corruption a major problem. This figure is alarming. Ordinary Afghans are confronted with corruption in their daily lives, whether at the police checkpoint or in interactions with other authorities, but they are also disillusioned by the corruption of those in higher offices. For Transparency International, a Berlin-based watchdog, and by the way, as we all know, an offspring of the World Bank's work on governance, corruption is defined as the misuse of entrusted power for private gain. The less a citizen associates himself or herself with the public good, the more he or she will rely only on private gains. Misuse of power or public resources are a great burden on any country. It stifles economic initiative. It allows the corrupt to enrich themselves at the expense of the rest of the society. It erodes trust of the people in their government. Some of the populisms in Europe and across the world can be attributed to a feeling of a detached elite out of reach for oversight or even prosecution. Some comparative European research shows that the population's perception of a country's, so to speak, quality of democracy and the perception of it being free from corruption are mutually reinforcing. This means the less corrupt a country is perceived, the more democratic it is seen. Therefore, effectively addressing corruption means democracy building, it means state building, it means building trust. Building trust is a necessary ingredient for sustainable peace and much more than a technical issue. In the ongoing Afghan peace negotiations, it is all about trust. A minimum of trust between the sides, trust in the supremacy of a pluralistic, democratic Afghanistan, trust in the Republic. And let there be no doubt, corruption is certainly not only an Afghan problem. It exists in all societies. Some countries have made more progress combating it than others. The EU institutions, for instance, have been working hard to make its own independent European Anti-Fraud Office, OLAF, even more effective. OLAF investigates, takes legal action where needed, including even criminal persecution, and provides recommendations to us. All of our European institutions receive whistleblower reports that are sent to OLAF for investigation. Also in my delegation, also in Afghanistan. Globally, Whenever and wherever progress was made, it was because of collective efforts by the legislative, executive, and judicial branch, by media and civil society at large, all promoting a culture of legality and justice. Afghanistan can do the same. It will take time, and we should be patient, but people should demand consistent progress. Certainly under your leadership, Mr. President, with the implementation of the 2017 anti-corruption strategy, Afghanistan already has made progress. For example, the regulatory framework and the merit-based civil service recruitment have been considerably improved. These are important steps. And talking about legislation, the Parliament of Afghanistan would have a key role to play to finally pass the necessary anti-corruption legislation, to hold the government accountable through oversight. I was very concerned to hear that the Voleshi Jirga rejected the anti-corruption law. And then comes implementation of laws and strategies by the executive, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. With the necessary political will at all levels, government has to create a culture of integrity and accountability in public service. There should be no exceptions. No one can be exempt from merit-based recruitment, from audits or criminal investigations. Everyone must be equal before the law. And in order to provide the necessary checks and oversight, let me encourage the government to establish the long-awaited independent anti-corruption commission and to develop a genuine long-term anti-corruption strategy. A strategy that builds on a thorough independent impact assessment of the previous strategy. We should learn from the past what went wrong and how we can fix it. In the intervening period, the EU, together with the UK and others, and I recognize my colleague Alison Blake, with whom I'm sharing the ambassadorial working group, we suggest that the updated version of the previous strategy serves as an interim guiding document on anti-corruption. We expect then the new strategy, drafted in consultation with civil society and the international community, to be in place by mid-2021. The EU continues to be a strong supporter of Afghanistan's anti-fraud agenda, also in our development cooperation. This is at the core of the state-building contract with your government. A contract which has helped implement reforms in public finance management, to increase budget transparency and to close loopholes for misuse and embezzlements of funds. We have also been supporting your public procurement reforms, which are helping your taxpayers actually get value for money in all government transactions. In addition to the EU's work on agriculture and health.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone. President Ghani, Your Excellency, First Lady, Vice President Saleh, Vice President Danish, members of the cabinet, officials of the Afghan government, members of the international community, civil society, friends and colleagues. I would love to be there with you this morning. I apologize for not being there in person, but I am still in quarantine, finishing up my quarantine after a very successful trip to Iran. So let me just start off by saying that this morning we are talking about a subject that is truly an eternal challenge of governments, and industries all over the world. Corruption is as old as history, and sadly will most likely be an ongoing universal problem for many, many decades to come. As the world deepens fuller into a global village, as cultures merge, and as technology continues to change societal interactions, corruption, this silent terrorist, this horrific cancer will continue to threaten our health and our security and our societies. And so it is quite appropriate that we gather together now with this 6th conference of the EU on anti-corruption, and that it is combined with the incredibly important and relevant issue of effective and good governance. So I thank the EU for this effort. I thank the EU and UK ambassador for the work they have done as part of in leading the ambassadors working group. And I thank the government of Afghanistan for their efforts in putting this session together today. Today's conference also, of course, focuses on the last of the 5 workshops on enriching the ANPDF2. This is a solid document that will guide Afghanistan's reform efforts in the last 4 years of the transformation decade. And having been here at the beginning of the transformation decade, it is indeed an honor to be here for this final lap. And I also want to thank President Ghani for instructing all of us to put together these workshops to provide an even deeper opportunity for us to exchange views on how the ANPDF2 truly can be that guiding document. The ANPDF2 will establish a new aid architecture that must deliver better results with less money and greater transparency. As noted by my colleague, the EU ambassador, we indeed are all architects in this task. The draft ANPDF2 recognizes how seriously corruption can undermine social and economic development in all segments of society and erode the public trust in state institutions. And as a consequence, the ANPDF2 rightly positions anti-corruption measures most assuredly as an element of peace building, an element of state building, and an element of market building. As part of the global community, Afghanistan ratified the UN Convention Against Corruption in 2008, which provides guidance measuring the fight against corruption and setting out measures to do so. Indeed, Afghanistan has taken steps, and a number of these measures, to incorporate provisions of the UN Convention into its legal framework. Let me highlight a few. The new penal code, Afghanistan's first comprehensive codification of criminal offenses, is in line with the convention and is indeed a milestone in this regard. We also have applauded the adoption of the 2018 anti-corruption law as the right step in the direction of providing anti-corruption institutions with a truly solid legal basis. And yet, the recent rejection of the anti-corruption law in the Walesa Jirga is a stark reminder of how fragile legal reforms can be if they do not get broad political support. The fight against corruption is a whole of government fight. It does not stop with efforts in the palace alone. It requires all government and even all society. We need to support and encourage all parties to step up in this critical fight. We therefore need inclusive reform processes that engage all relevant institutions, civil society, and individual citizens to the largest extent possible. Anti-corruption reforms need broad support to be effective and need to be thoroughly consulted with all stakeholders. On last year's Anti-Corruption Day, the UN Secretary General stated, "Corruption threatens the well-being of our societies, the future of our children, and the health, the very health of our planet." it must be fought by all, for all. I reiterate the UN's offer to work with Afghanistan and the broader political community, civil society, on consolidating the institutional framework in line with the UN Convention. And in particular, I would highlight in building the new Anti-Corruption Commission and continuing to support the further development of the unfolding new anti-corruption strategy. We look forward to supporting Afghanistan in this effort and in the implementation of this new anti-corruption strategy based on what would be a thorough impact assessment of previous reform efforts, including of challenges and successes of the Anti-Corruption Justice Center. This strong document, the ANPDF2, that will be made stronger from these workshops and from this conference in particular, is clearly an effective tool to lead Afghanistan toward this goal. And the UN in Afghanistan is, of course, honored and stands to work with you toward this aim. That the UN and the UN family here in Afghanistan will work with the government of Afghanistan and the donors to ensure a new approach, a more consolidated, deliberate approach to building those institutions and to ensuring that that durable goal is in fact reached.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The First Lady, the First Vice President of Afghanistan, Mr. Saleh, the Second Vice President, Professor Danish, members of the Cabinet, Ambassador Van Brandt and Ambassador Blake, Ambassador Lyons, distinguished guests, members of the business community, members of civil society, fellow citizens. It's a pleasure to participate in this discussion. Let me first express the deep sympathies of the Afghan people in government for the losses that COVID is inflicting on societies of our partners. Horrible news, but I hope that the development of vaccine and coordinated international work will enable us to move forward. I'm going to focus on imperatives, governance, and tools of governance, and conclude with actions. Our fundamental drive from the perspective of the Afghan citizens for effective governance and combating corruption is the gap between our expectations and our resources. Thanks to your generosity, the society's expectations are of an upper middle income country, while our resources, existing resources, are of one of the least developed countries. Without a strategy to develop wealth, we will be dealing with eternal frustration. Because once expectations are set, they're not going to be lowered. In this society, fortunately, is a vital national discussion that is product of the freedoms that we enjoy under our Constitution, one of the freest media in the world, in a truly open discussion. But the discussion now needs to focus on how we both manage our expectations and how we fulfill them. Key to this is development of the considerable natural capital, $1 trillion, and expanding. The picture on mining and oil and gas is improving by the day. But our most fundamental capital is our location. And our location, again, is becoming solid gold, because the large-scale projects that we're awaiting for centuries are underway. TAPI this year is going to start construction in Afghanistan, and a whole range of other projects that I could explain. Here, our greatest new development is Fortesco's engagement with us. 20,000 megawatts of power are to be produced from the water resources of Afghanistan. It would enable us to then develop our metals totally on the basis of green standards. And I'm delighted that 120 Afghan engineers will be shortly leaving for Australia. We have not received this type of sustained human capital investment in a very long time. All of these are being chosen, but in order to attract Fortesco, we were one of 120 countries under considerations and one of 6 to be chosen in a short list, and that was arrived at within 3 days of very intensive work, because the investment unit in the presidency ensured that Fortesco could be assured that there will be zero corruption, and I thank Vice President Saleh and Vice President Danish for their immense support in this regard. What this means is, if we want to realize the potential $1 trillion and then continue it on an ongoing basis, we have to adopt international standards on trade, transit, and investment, and align our governance systems to the goal of creating wealth. We also must adopt the current state of the play. And I completely agree with Ambassador Line, we must do more with less. This is 2 dimensions. One, the cost of delivering infrastructure and services is totally unacceptable. And we've made breakthroughs to show that we can deliver much more with much less. The Darlaman Palace, the 1,000 mosques under construction, a number of dams and others, shows that the cost can be brought down, quality can be enhanced, but the adoption, the key to that has been the adoption of the Singapore housing model on the part of our presidential delivery unit and the national company. And we are delighted that ADB accepted this company to build 15 hospitals within a 7-month period. So a lot more should be done with a lot less. Our main focus now is on the cost of infrastructure, particularly roads. All of our efforts, about 80% of our efforts in managing COVID came from reallocation of existing aid portfolio, and we are incredibly grateful to all of you around the table in the World Bank and ADB for agreeing to those. It was not new money. Allocation is fundamental in the problem of right allocation and right expenditure that we'll come to. We need to demonstrate our case, and particularly the issue here is competitive funds. The test of every ministry for me is how much they are able to get from competitive funds. All of you, particularly the European Union, is a lot of these competitive funds, and second is environmental funds. We have to mobilize to get resources. And last but most importantly, peace building is going to require at least reintegrating 3 million more Afghans who are now living in Pakistan and Iran, and stabilizing the internally displaced and others. Without trust, and I completely agree, Ambassador von Brandt, on your emphasis on trust. Without trust, the society will be ripped to pieces by entry of 3 million people, because we have absorbed 10 million people in the last 19 years, 4 million of them during the last. It's a race, because if you don't get to 7 to 9% rate of growth, poverty is going to increase. And poverty is our fundamental problem, because a lot comes from this. Given this, we need to take effectiveness as the positive agenda and anti-corruption as the necessary agenda to get the necessary and sufficient conditions for stability, peace, and prosperity. There is good news. The good news is on the state of play on governance as a central concept of our time. Factors accounting for policy success and failures are being documented rigorously. Great policy successes, equally great policy failures, are being documented very deliberately. Now we have established advisors to us with whom we say what are our policy goals, in which way would we go. Previously, this type of data bank in resource centers did not exist. We, in the last 6 years, have been dealing with turbulence, crisis, and uncertainty as the continuous condition. Despite of this, we're facing how to create the conditions to get out of this. But the conceptual work that is being done and the operational implications of this are really becoming very relevant to us. Added to this is that now pragmatism as an approach to problem solving and not just as a rule of thumb is making a very clear comeback. Particularly lessons are being drawn as to how crises and unprecedented problems, because there are two types of crises, one that are inherent to systems and one that are unprecedented. The 2008 fiscal crisis, financial crisis, for instance, had very few precedents. And studies now document how these were dealt with, what are to be lessons to be drawn from it. In equally significant, leadership, management, public participation, and strategy. 4 key terms of our discourse were largely borrowed from the private sector literature. We have to reach to our roots and be able to understand that no one can speak for citizens except themselves. Everybody else is welcome in the conversation, but the Constitution of Afghanistan is citizen-based. Citizen rights and obligations are the core of our being and key to the survival of the Republic. We need to understand that everybody who attempts to speak in their name must have representation. Today, there's a convergence in the development institutions. Asian Development Bank, IMF, OECD, and the World Bank, as well as bilateral aid organizations. What they're focused now is an enormous series of tools are available as to how to do budgeting, auditing, procurement, you name it. This shifts the balance because it shifts it from preaching or recommendation to standards that are applicable and measurable. Unfortunately, very little investment took place in accounting and auditing. You would think it's obvious. The simultaneous developments in conceptual and operational levels allow for a focused and collaborative dialogue on corruption between governments and developmental partners. But more importantly, for our society. So let me reflect on what we've learned, at least what I've learned, because we need workshops and we need the national dialogue to say that these lessons. First, political will at the presidency is necessary but not sufficient. Ministerial, provincial, municipal, district, rural village, and urban neighborhood need to be understood in their own terms in shaping strategies developed by, with, and for them. It's important to understand governance is not, in our context, dictation from the presidency. The presidency is a nodal point. A lot of things converge there. But if you want delivery, you need to have empowered people who are convinced of a consensus. The consensus, therefore, what we have today, which I'm delighted to share with you, is consensus for effectiveness in fighting corruption between the two vice presidents, myself, and the top leadership team. Delivery through third parties poses distinctive challenges of legitimacy and accountability. The latest example is Nuristan's health sector. For months, the NGO is not able to, unable to pay the health workers. I created that program again. So we have no problem involving civil society in delivery, but the roles and functions need to be very clearly differentiated. Those that are contractors are not civil society, they are contractors for services. Those that engage in advocacy have a different role. So a differentiation of what constitutes this rich array of institutions called civil society needs to take place. And again, the question of what is the effective way. Citizens' aspirations, because fortunately, the dialogue now is about harnessing our wealth. You will not find a single Afghan who's not proud of our water policy. It's changing us. Between southern and southwestern Afghanistan alone, we are harnessing 6 billion cubic meters of water. What does this mean? Tragedies that befell us 1,000 years ago, 800 years ago, and 700 years ago are finally being addressed. But water security is key to poverty eradication. But when we looked, it was extremely uneven. And now we are attempting to. This year, I'm delighted to say, in terms of actions, for the first time, we've reversed the trend. The recurrent budget has been cut down by 3%, and the developmental budget is increased by 3%. Let me come now in actions. First, I'm delighted to announce that the Anti-Corruption Commission has been formed. I've signed it, 5-member team, and according to the rules, 3 men and 2 women. It will commence its work from now, and all the resources and authorities that the law specifies will be transferred to it. We hope that they will be a functional body and not repeat the sad story of some of these commissions in Africa. The jury on these commissions is out. In some areas like Indonesia, they've done a great job. In some other places, they've been failures. So it's extremely important that their terms of reference are clearly adopted by us jointly, and that they are accountable to the citizens, Parliament, and the government. And that they do not second-guess or subvert the authority of the institutions that are legally charged with performance of functions. We have a court system that is reforming. And again, within a week, you will see the nomination of 3 members of the Supreme Court. We're in the final review. Last week, the candidates were not appropriate. Given the weight of it, we want an absolutely top-rate judges that can perform this and at this crucial moment hold the legality of the country together. Second, the new strategy, anti-corruption strategy, needs to be developed on the basis of wide consultation. A dialogue with our donors on lessons learned that this workshop will engage in and reflections is extremely important. Until then, first, the commitments given in the current anti-corruption strategy would be accelerated, particularly corruption of high-ranking officials, of which we have had recent examples, the latest being the mayor of Herat, prior to that, the head of the Standards and Norm. Warrants, serving of warrants, we need to agree on what constitutes a warrant, because there's been some misunderstanding because of this. The Center Against Corruption will be strengthened further. We are delighted that now the law that passed that requires seizure of assets acquired in corrupt means is enforced. The latest example was a director in the counter-narcotics. One of his properties alone was worth 300 million AFs, and he was responsible for being the leader for distribution of narcotics, rather than the security charter that Vice President Salih has implemented in Kabul is given us an environment to be able to expose and go after. So we will go and enhance it. Verification of assets is absolutely key and one of the jobs of the new commission. I'm not signing any travel documents from people who have not filled their assets. So whether it's a member of parliament and in the cabinet and others, it's all been done. We have a firm commitment that the declaration of asset will be reinforced. Key to moving forward is budget reform. A sustainable expansion of revenue and a growth strategy fitted to our context. We need a coherent strategy. Our revenue cannot be based just on customs and telecom. So we will be coming with detailed proposals, Ambassador Von Brandt, Ambassador Blake, other colleagues, to expand the size of the pie. We need to have focus on those sectors that can really produce growth. Telecom was one example. It produced reliable revenue for the government. It produced investments, significant investment, billions of dollars, and it provided services. Original expectation was that 400,000 phones will saturate the Afghan market. Well, now you know what the story is, 29 million and 92% coverage. So revenue will become a top priority in a systematic way in the current budget discussions with Minister Argandiwal and colleagues. I spent 3 full days mediating on problems between those who want expenditure on recurrent things. This is not time for luxury. We have to do with basic necessities. Even some of what are called decencies, we should part with. It's focus on necessities. It's time for an austerity budget. If we don't show it, we cannot demonstrate to you and your citizens because you're being extremely generous. Biometric data of all government employees is being completed. Now, not only do we have it for the security sector, but also for above 95% of the civil servants. The two will be brought into one coherent database so we can manage employment within the government. All the accusations of ghost employees and others, I think, will vanish within this. And biographic and biodata would be linked to the payroll. And on payroll, our goal is within a year to go towards electronic payment. The first electronic bank in the country is being licensed. Electronic IDs for the citizens is our top priority. We have exceeded 1.5 million. because we need to know how to manage bioinformation, particularly for poverty interventions. You cannot. For effectiveness in anti-corruption, we're going to make a series of investments in human capital. First, we need to train at least 1,000 accountants and 1,000 auditors. This is not rocket science, it takes a year. Equally, the UN has a program on certifying, UNDP has a program on certifying procurement. All these disciplines that are really disciplines and based on the material that I previously said, we would develop a particular human development program here. We have started a comprehensive review of our national programs. And again, in subsequent discussions, I'd like to share, but I'll illustrate just with some. First, the security sector. The security sector is being thoroughly reviewed for its expenditure. The budget process, the budget and revenue process within the Ministry of Finance, we have taken very detailed measures to make sure. 3, infrastructure. Infrastructure is being thoroughly reviewed with the goal of increasing quality, decreasing cost, and increasing speed. Rural Development Ministry, again, is being restructured so that there's more balanced development. Women's Ministry will turn into a Ministry of Policy and Delivery. The $100 million World Bank assistance program on economic empowerment of the women will be transferred to this ministry, as well as some other programs. On the rule of law, we have charted the entire value chain of rule of law in one big page. And every component of this, Ambassador von Brandt, will be reviewed now, including the critical link of enforcement from the police vis-à-vis criminal issues, and on the economic issues, the dysfunctionality of Ministry of Justice in delivering justice, because that portion goes to that particular division. In terms of laws, you've indicated, and thanks to Vice President Danish in particular, over 410 laws and regulations have been passed. The question now is to see the implementation of the laws and have reflections from a citizen perspective, in societal perspective, business, civil society, all key stakeholders as to what's the application. And here, the reason I'm hopeful, I hope you've noticed a generational change is taking place. My generation, the generation of 1970s, was still the dominant generation when I became president. Today, the generation of 2000 is coming to lead and own. I see my role as a bridge. Legacy is going to be on what we leave as functioning institutions. I don't have a political party. I don't have a political family. I believe totally in the values of our Constitution, and I'm dedicated to it, and I'm delighted now. I think that we have a team to be able to do this. Once again, thank you for this opportunity. I wish the members of the Anti-Corruption Commission luck, and I want to assure them of both the support of the presidency and the people of Afghanistan in this great endeavor. Thank you.